Some of the work that I've been doing over the last 2 years on building wildfire resilience. So, for the last 2 years, my team and I have been working on a project called the Wildfire Resilience Index that aims to measure and communicate wildfire resilience across Western North America to inform policymakers and to provide transparent information to the community. I'm really excited to share what I've done, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts and feedback because you all are some of the anticipated end users that we have. All right, so wildfire, as you all probably know, is what scientists and policymakers call a wicked problem, in that it's challenging and it's highly resistant to resolution. The challenge of wildfire lacks a singular, clear solution. There are often unforeseen outcomes. Solutions often involve behavioral changes for people, which can be really tricky. Wildfires create challenges that are both multifaceted and independent or interdependent. And finally, managing the wildfire challenge is operationally complex. And the intersection of all of these dimensions is what makes wildfire a wicked problem. Not because fire is evil, but because there's no clear pathway forward.
So sorry to interrupt, Kat. It looks like your screen is no longer being shared. It was originally, and then I think it went away.
Oh, do you see a PowerPoint? Do you see like a forest, maybe?
Now we do.
Okay, great. That's fine.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Thanks for telling me. Otherwise, I would have just continued. Um, All right, so again, as you all know, being in and from Santa Barbara, we live in a fire-prone landscape. Wildfires happen because air contains oxygen, which makes fires possible. But fires are a natural part of our landscape, and they're necessary for ecological communities to function. However, wildfires are currently occurring at a pace and scale that we aren't accustomed to. In some cases, these fires might be exceeding the bounds from which our natural systems can recover. And then additionally, fires can be really devastating when they intersect with our built environment. And so, as a state and as a nation, we're suffering loss of lives, properties, livelihoods, and communities at an unprecedented rate. And just on a personal level, this is a photo of my cousin's home in Altadena that burned last January. So, this is a problem that really resonates with me personally, and I'm sure all of you. Okay, so this leads us to the core challenge that I hope to address today. That was sort of the preamble, is how can we coexist with fire? And so just to give you a little bit of background as to who I am and why I'm here, my name is Kat. I'm a research scientist at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. NCEAS is a local research group that's affiliated with the University of Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara. And I think it's helpful to give a little bit of context as to what NCEAS is and why we're the folks who are doing this kind of work. So the way that I describe NCEAS to my friends and to my family is like a blend between a think tank and a startup. NCEAS is an accelerator of impactful science. We bring together diverse perspectives and data sets to ask and answer fundamental questions and to identify solutions to some of the most pressing environmental challenges. As I outlined earlier, wildfire is a wicked problem and it touches so many different parts of the world. And so, what that means is we need to bring together a bunch of different diverse experts and expertises to bear on this problem because the impacts of wildfire on our natural and social systems are so extensive. And so around the world, there are lots of different people who are working on this problem, and there are thousands of different fantastic subject matter experts who specialize on different aspects of wildfire. So these people include folks like forest ecologists, grassland ecologists, hydrologists, soil scientists, people who study evacuations, folks who do their entire research program on landslides, financial institutions and economists. There's lawyers, policymakers, and behavioral scientists, all of whom are working on different dimensions or aspects of wildfire research and wildfire impacts on our natural and social systems. But often these folks don't talk to each other. Experts are often siloed. The more specialized you get, the more you just talk to people who are in your own sort of field, and people don't interact in a way that we think is helpful for building wildfire resilience. These silos and these specialties can serve as an echo chamber and limit the crosswalk across diverse domains, which limits our ability to paint a holistic picture of the challenge that we face. And it limits cross-disciplinary synergies and insights. So the solution for this project, and the solution that's been key to NCEIS's success over the last 30 years, is to bring experts from all of these divergent disciplines into a single place to ask, what does it mean to be resilient to wildfire, and how can we measure that? And so to us, this looks like an index, and this is what I'm going to share with you guys today. An index is a single score that combines multiple types of information into one clear measure. An index is a way to bring together information from all sorts of different diverse domains and different data sources into a shared decision space so that we're all talking about the same thing in the same way. So an example of an index that you might be familiar with is the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is a stock market index that tracks stock performance of 500 leading companies listed on exchanges in the United States. It doesn't tell you how an individual company is doing, rather it tells you how the market as a whole is performing. And the S&P 500 doesn't capture all aspects of the economy, and it's not predictive of a single stock or a single stock's performance. Rather, it indicates how the market as a whole is doing. So this is the goal of the Wildfire Resilience Index, is to build something like the S&P 500 that collects diverse information and puts it out there in a single metric. So this project's been going on for a little bit over 2 years. And over the last 2 years, we've had long conversations with a diversity of different people in the wildfire space. We basically performed a needs assessment to figure out what landscape values are important to people in the context of wildfire. And through these conversations, we came up with 8 domains that span social and environmental dimensions that we think address these landscape values. The domains that we included are infrastructure, communities, livelihood, sense of place, species, habitat, water, and air. And so after having these conversations and coming up with these domains of interest, we needed to populate our index with indicators or data that would be indicative of these different system performances. And I think it's good to take a beat here to point out that the index is not about fire suppression or limiting the amount of the fire on the landscape. It's saying if a fire will happen, because fires happen, how will we respond? What will system response be? And to better quantify these aspects of response and resilience, we partitioned our index into elements of resistance and recovery. So how well will this system in this place for this domain resist the negative impacts of wildfire, as well as what is its potential for recovery after a wildfire should occur? And so before I dive in and show you the results, which I think is what probably we're all most interested in, I wanted to share a little bit about what the data that went into the index looks like. So a primary motivation for developing the Wildfire Resilience Index, or the WRI, was for it to be very finely spatially resolved. Basically, we wanted to be able to measure resilience at a scale that's relevant for community planning. So information that can differ among neighborhoods in the same town. This means that we were interested in high resolution geospatial data. And geospatial data is information that has a geographic component. So it's data about where things are. Examples of geospatial data include things like the location of structures, roads, range maps for species, information about where events occur, what congressional district you're in, what building codes apply based on where you are, things like that. Most of you probably use geospatial data every day without thinking about it. An example would be the mapping service or location service that's probably on your phone. So through the course of developing this index, we collected close to 100 geospatial data layers that we rolled together to create this index score. And it's a lot of data to go through. I'm not going to share all 100 some odd indicators because I think that that's a little tedious. I'm just going to give you three examples in maps in the next few slides to just give you a flavor for what we've been up to. All right, so this is a map from Microsoft. It's called the Microsoft Building Footprints. It's a map that shows the location of buildings globally. These data are the result of satellite data and a machine learning algorithm that identifies and draws footprints around every structure. So it's better than point data. Some countries have been excluded, notably China, but we estimate that for Western North America, we're capturing over 95% of the structures in this area. This is OpenStreetMaps data, which contains information on all of the road networks in the world. In the US, these data include those that were collected by our state and federal government, so it's very comprehensive of the road networks that exist. And then finally, this is a map of the wildland-urban interface, or the WUI. This is where wildland overlaps with the built environment. And this particular map was produced by a group of researchers here in the US in collaboration with our US Forest Service. And so that's just three examples of the 100 some odd data layers that we've included in the Wildfire Resilience Index. And what we do with all of that information is we align them spatially as a grid so that all the grid cells overlap correctly. And we're able to calculate a score for each cell in this grid. And as I mentioned earlier, we wanted our end product to be maximally useful to community members. So our final spatial resolution is at 90 meters. And to make that a little bit more meaningful, a 90-meter grid cell is about the size of a football field. So very fine spatial resolution that can capture differences within a neighborhood. And just as a note, our study area is Western North America. So in total, we have about 1 billion cells of geospatial data for our index. Okay, and so with all of that preamble, finally, here is our result. This is the Wildfire Resilience Index for Western North America. On the left is the average score for the whole region, as well as for each domain. So across the entire Western US, these 12 states, a province, and a territory, the average score was 73. As you can hopefully see, some of the domains scored better and some of the domains performed worse. So in this particular map, water scored fairly poorly, 55 out of a potential of 100. And I would note that this is the index score for 2024, which was a pretty dry year. Infrastructure also scored pretty low, 60 out of a potential score of 100. And this is because across this entire region, there's pretty weak and inconsistent building codes. In contrast, you can see that species, which reflects the biodiversity health in a region, did pretty well. And that's because in Western North America, most of our species do not face significant extinction threat. So that's what we call our flower plot. That's the wheel. On the right, you can see the map of the score. And remember, this is at 90-meter resolution. So the pixel size is the size of a football field. I do want to point out before you stare too much at it, that the scale bar is truncated. So the scores range from 60 to 85. And what that means is that there are opportunities to build resilience in almost every place. Nowhere is scoring perfectly. And I think that we can draw out some patterns that are useful, but I do want to note that this is almost 100 pieces of information. So trying to identify the cause in every place simultaneously is quite difficult. But we can see that there are pretty low scores in North Alaska. And when we started to dig into why that might be true, what we found was that Alaska had a very dry year in 2024. And so this is driven by rainfall shortages. We can also see a pretty distinct outline of the Central Valley in California, where we can see lower scores. And I think that this has to do with the habitats there. They're pretty degraded by our agricultural development. And we can also see a band of low scores in Southern California near the Salton Sea that I think is driven by suppressed economic activity and poor air quality. And so, what I hope you can see is that these scores are very heterogeneous, and it just begs for unpacking of the specific drivers in all of these places to figure out why these scores are how they are and what you might want to do or not do to improve them. And so I'll return to this a little bit later on, but we are in the process of building a public facing website where you can explore the score for your specific region and unpack all of the different indicators and values that go into it. So, one of the really cool things about mapping at 90-meter resolution, and one of the reasons we went through so much effort to do it, is because it allows you to zoom in and calculate scores really flexibly and at any geography that you want. So, this is Western North America. This is not the scale of management or intervention generally. This is too large of an area. And so we can start to punch out areas that might be a little bit more tractable for direct intervention. And so this is just a zoom in on the state of California. And so what we can see here is that California is scoring better than the region as a whole. The state of California has a score of a 78 versus a 73. We can see that, California has an improved infrastructure score compared to the regional average, and that's because California has pretty good building codes. You contrast that to a place like Wyoming that has no WUI specific building codes. We can see that our water score, while not great, is better than the national average or the regional average, and that's because California's drought wasn't as bad as other regions. But our iconic species score, those species that are of particular importance to us in California, are scoring a little bit worse. And I think that this is because things like our state bird, the California condor, is critically endangered. And so at this regional level, we can see and start to draw out different patterns compared to the whole region. And then this is where I get nervous, but we can zoom in even further and we can look at Santa Barbara County specifically. And I'm guessing this is the area that you guys are the most interested in. Um, we can see that, on average, we score a touch worse than California as a whole. And to me, it looks like this was driven predominantly by our water score. 2024 was a pretty dry year in Santa Barbara specifically. But what I would point out, if we sort of zoom in, is that there's a lot of variability in scores, even at this sub-county level. So our lowest scores are in the west by Vandenberg, while some of our highest scores are in the Los Padres. We also see some really low scores in Isla Vista, where the students live, which is probably because they have pretty low income relative to everyone else in Santa Barbara. And so if you stare at this, if you squint, my guess is you're probably looking at where you live. But the point here is really to show that there's a high degree of spatial variability even within this county. Okay, so these three maps show the outcome of 2 years of work and show wildfire resilience in a flexible way at a massive spatial scale as well as a highly regional or local scale. And so what usually comes up at this point when I'm talking about this is like, okay, what do you do? Like, what do you do with this information? And I see three ways that you can use the index. The first is you can use it to prioritize, to identify and prioritize actions that will improve your score. The second thing you can do is you can use the index to inform response after a wildfire occurs. And the third is that you can use this index score and the underlying data to inform future planning. And so, what does this look like? I think it's useful to give a little bit more information and more specificity here. So in Santa Barbara, we saw a score of 77. I think it's really important to ask and figure out what are our levers for improvement. I do want to point out before we get into it that the index is not prescriptive, right? This is not telling anyone what to do. It's not recommending any particular management action or intervention. Rather, it's giving you an assessment of where you are currently in terms of wildfire resilience, and it provides a menu of options for what you could do. So you could use the index to improve your scores. You could do things like advocate for stronger building codes, right? That is something that you could do. As many of you probably know, there's currently a Zone Zero debate in action right now around defensible space. This is a place where you may wish to intervene or you may wish not to, depending on your perspective. You could also work to create community wildfire protection plans, and that would improve your score in the community's domain. As you probably know, community wildfire protection plans are community organizations that are built through collaborative networks that qualify local communities to seek federal funding for things like landscape treatments. And the last thing you could do is you could advocate for landscape treatments. People are really nervous about this and about things like prescribed fire. But the reality is that an area that's recently burned has all the fuel and deadwood burned out and is less likely to experience a catastrophic wildfire in the future. So something like this could improve your regional score. So as members of the community, you could advocate for and support these types of landscape treatments. And so these are just three examples of things that you could do to improve your local score. There are likely many other options, including things that I haven't thought about. You can also use the index to inform response after a wildfire. For example, low scores in some regions might reflect less socioeconomic advantage, and it might be equitable to deploy recovery resources to those regions first. So, what springs to mind for me is resources for navigating insurance and aid after a wildfire. A community might also see a region with a low score and decide on earlier or assisted evacuation. For example, an area or a census tract that has a high density of assisted living homes, like some of those impacted by the Eden Fire, might have benefited from earlier and assisted evacuation. And then finally, the index might be useful for targeting restoration. If you look across the landscape and you identify areas that have low recovery scores in the habitats domain, this might be a place where you choose to intervene and assist recovery in a place where it wouldn't happen otherwise. All right, and then finally, the index can be used to plan for the future. I think we're all aware that there's an urgent need for retrofitting of individual structures and communities across California, across this entire region. And the index can highlight where the greatest liabilities lie and help inform prioritization of resources and incentives to do this kinds of retrofitting. Examples include things like retrofitting grants and infrastructure improvements. In many places, but not everywhere, we do need more fire on the landscape. And so I think the index is a useful tool for helping to plan for a future with more beneficial fire. As time marches on, we should see the signals of beneficial fire as an improvement in scores, which will hopefully soften public perspective or perceptions towards these prescribed and managed fires. And finally, the index can help inform the prioritization and placement of things like clean air centers and temporary refuge areas. So clean air centers are places where people can go for refuge when air quality is hazardous and should be placed where vulnerability and risk are highest. And temporary refuge areas are places where people go during a wildfire when they're unable to evacuate safely. It's a place to go and ride out a fire that's resistant to loss. And so this is not ready for public use yet, but we're in the process of building a website that can help you better explore and navigate what your score looks like. So this should be a video where I'm toggling through a website and I'm able to click on the different domains and see what the scores are across the region. We can then zoom into our area of interest, which for me is Santa Barbara. For you all is probably Santa Barbara too. We can open up specific domains and we can click on the different elements of resilience, so resistance and recovery. And then we can toggle through the different indicator layers that go into creating that score. And I think that being able to explore your own score in this sort of way and at this spatial scale is really useful for planning and education and decision making. Okay. So to wrap it all up, The Wildfire Resilience Index is a tool that measures and communicates wildfire resilience at a landscape scale in a common currency. We are a free and transparent tool that you can use without paywalls. There is no subscription model. And this is a tool that we've already created and that we are hoping to launch as a public website in the next few months for you all to use. We have secured some funding to be able to repeat the index year over year so you can see how your score improves based on interventions or actions over the coming years. We also have some funding to do a retrospective analysis. So I'm in the process of hindcasting or reconstructing this index from 2005 to 2025 so that we can look historically at what our index scores have been, how they've performed or predicted responses to fires, and what our return on investment for different intervention and management strategies have been. So, what I think makes the index really powerful is that it brings together information that have never been on the same table before. So each piece of information in this index, each of our data layers, tells you something on its own about wildfire resilience. But when you put them all together, you can see this more holistic picture or this system-wide picture of resilience. The WRI is a composite index that can be used to show where resilience is strong, where it's weak, and how human and ecological systems fit together. And so we hope that people can use this tool to identify trade-offs across different domains, across different intervention strategies, and to help demonstrate how actions might improve scores over time. And so this tool is aimed at policymakers, managers, and residents, and it's really meant to help make sense of this complex, wicked challenge and to provide information so that people can make more informed decisions. And that is all I have for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat. Amazing. I like all your data layers. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Anybody have some questions for Kat? Emily.
Wait, me, Emily?
Yes, Emily. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I didn't raise my hand, but I actually did have a question. Kat, thanks so much. And just a quick introduction. I'm Emily Senegal Thyroff and the newest hire as the applied landscape ecologist here. Um, and one of my questions was, do you all have an idea or like an approach you think would be helpful with like providing this index on a time scale? So like you mentioned, like that was a 2024 score. So do you think it'll be annual or do you think quarterly would be helpful or monthly? And what do you think would be realistic?
Yeah, I think so. At this point, we've proposed to do annual updates um, because so as you can imagine, with so many different data inputs, the pace at which new data is
Yes.
released is super
Yeah.
variable.
Yeah.
And so what you don't want is you don't want something like water to be highly dynamic, week over week, while other scores like income are only responding at an annual or at a 5-year scale. And so this has been a really interesting question to deal with is like, what is the release schedule that makes sense based on the resolution, the temporal resolution of the inputs? And so right now we're thinking annually, but this is like a good reason to have these kinds of conversations too, right? Like talking to folks with the California Wildfire Task Force, like they are very much want a 6-month release cycle timed around the water year. And it's just different, right? And so depending on, you know, this is why we have these conversations, basically. So if you have an opinion, I'd love to hear it.
An opinion right now, but I was thinking, I guess, yeah, my opinion as very new to this and not knowing is like it would be cool to have as often as possible the score updated. Annually doesn't seem like enough, but to your point of all the layers that are going into it, you don't want one layer telling the story more because it's updated more often.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Kristen and Charlotte, then Monica.
Thank you. Kristen Sneddon, Santa Barbara City Council. And this is amazing and fantastic. I have a question about, so in the city of Santa Barbara, we already have a community wildfire protection plan. And
Yes.
so how would this interface with that and, you know, vegetation management units and what the state says are the high risk areas versus, and I realize this is data and you're, you know, but since you're working with policy people too, and it's an incredibly powerful tool. And then things with like insurance or other things like that. Like, do you have thoughts on how those could be interfaced?
I have thoughts, but I would definitely want to talk to practitioners more before giving a quick answer. One thing I will say that probably got a little bit buried because this was a lot of, honestly, this was a lot of work, so it's hard to cover everything really well. This is not a risk map, which is what a lot of the CWPPs have to do with their like hazard zones. So this is not about wildfire hazard. There is no probability of burning. This is just if there was a fire, what would the consequences be? How would the system respond?
Thank you so much for clarifying that. This is incredible, incredible work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So Charlotte, Monica, and then Kelly.
Hi, I want to just echo what others are saying. I think that this work is interesting and impressive. I especially liked it in the end when you showed sort of that you can pull apart the layers. And and that kind of brings me to my question, which you started to answer actually just a moment ago. The index as a whole is a composite of many things. You started talking about that. And these things are disparate. They are very different. Even defining each individual thing immediately sprang to mind. Like you said, you had water. I'm like, well, what does water mean? I mean, what are we talking about? And I saw at the end that you can break that down. Like, I don't know how much you can break water down, but air, is that air quality? Is that, again, Emily's question is a good one. Sort of air quality is a very, very seasonal thing. There's public perceptions that I'm guessing you gathered either yourselves via surveys, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm getting at is the index as a whole, when you literally put all of these numbers together from a variety of really different kinds of data, like it can't be more different. How would you describe that number? And I literally had to write down higher number is better because I'm like, well, what are we looking at? What does the number mean? And so that's my question. If you would be able to answer either from your own professional sort of thinking or on behalf of this project as a whole, what does that number mean?
Yeah. So I will avoid giving you the mathy answer, which is what
No, give me the
springs.
mathy answer. I would love the mathy answer first
The-
if it's short.
Great. The mathy answer is that when you make a composite index and you bound it between 0 and 100,
Mhm.
and you have so many indicators that go into it, you end up with convergence on a fairly stable intermediate score. That is
Exactly.
just the nature of taking together all of these pieces of information.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things in the paper that I wrote for this that we draw out is that like you can have a score of 73
Mm-hmm.
for so many different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out how to articulate and explore like what's driving that is really important. And you also need to think about like as a person on the landscape, you have to think about like what are the things that you can control and what are the things that you can't control. And that can tell you where your policy and intervention levers are. So you started with water, so that's a great one to think about, right? Um, for water, we have indicators in that domain that have to do with quantity and timing on the landscape. Did you get enough rain or too much rain? Did you get the right amount of rain compared to a 30-year average? And did it come at the right time? And odds are you can't do anything about that, right? I mean, you as an individual cannot change
So
that.
you've made sort of a mini index out of sort of the quality of I don't know, water existence from natural sources on the land
Mhm.
that you then feed into, the
Mhm.
massive data set
Yes.
that you have. And each of these indicators is sort of a little mini composite. Am I right?
Yes. So each
Okay.
domain, yeah, totally. Each domain is a sub index
Yeah.
of the composite index.
Okay. So two questions. I don't want to take up too much more time. One, how would you literally say, what does that number mean? So I saw 70, whatever it was for us, the big number. That's one question.
Yeah.
Two, is a little more nuts and boltsy. When the tool is rolled out on the website, I saw that we can disaggregate to a fair level of granularity. Would you say like that we could pull each individual I want to say data set, I guess, out from those mini composites? Can we do that? Or are we kind of like, do we hit a floor where it was like, okay, here, this, you know what I mean? Because there's so many numbers in there. So
Yeah.
question one, what does a big number mean? Question two, how much can I pull that apart when I start playing with it?
Okay. So question number one is what does it mean to have a 73 out of 100? That
Mm-hmm.
means that there is significant room for improvement
Improvement in what?
in your score.
In what?
In your score
Yeah, but
for
improving.
wildfire resilience. You then can
Okay.
unpack each
All right.
domain for wildfire resilience. That is your wildfire resilience score.
So excuse me, and just confirming now, the number is wildfire resilience. That is, and now I'm putting words in your mouth, how quickly or well a community or space will bounce back after a wildfire. Does that sound
Resist,
right?
resist the negative impacts of wildfire and
Okay.
recover from.
Okay. Perfect.
So it has
Any
both components.
Perfect. Okay. And then can I just go ahead and pull apart those mini composites when the
Yep.
tool comes out? Okay.
Yep.
And I saw you just kind of click the toggles and you kind of, it
Yep.
removes layers.
It shows you the layer that you want. We're providing in a public facing way. We're only
Uh-huh.
providing down to the census tract, and that's because
Okay.
providing any finer will break your computer.
I understand.
Um,
Okay.
if you want finer scale resolution, we are also in the process of building um, a software package that can
I
do that.
understand. Okay, perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sheriff, for the question. So then Monica, Kelly, Carla, Joan, and then Emery.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I know the questions are piling up. You did an excellent job capturing what is very complex. Um, I'm going to go very small question or very kind of niche question compared to Charlotte's. You talked about resilience, and you've said it a few times now, being the ability to resist and then, come back from.
Mhm,
We consider resilience also the ability to respond to the
mhm.
specific kind of acute emergency. And I totally get why that is probably the most difficult of those three to capture. But I'm curious if you see any ability to try to capture that or include that in the index, or if it's just kind of that's important, but it's not part of
Yeah.
this.
S- So some of this might just be semantics, and some of it's probably very important, right? So, like, when you say respond, what do you mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I consider it kind of the almost the way we break ready, set, go into like prepare, get your home ready, get all the things in place. So that would be, the ability to resist would be defensible space, community connections. The ability to respond would be have the capacity, and have the trained personnel. Um, However that takes shape, obviously that changes community to community. And then post fire, recovery would be all the things that I know we consider in recovery. Making sure people can get back to their homes or can rebuild, making sure we have economic resilience and bounce back.
Yeah.
So those are kinds of the three categories that I see. But if you're splitting those three into two, I totally see how that also captures the same thing.
Yeah. So like the ability to respond, like, do you have trained personnel and can they get to where they need to go? For us, that would be categorized in the resist because they are part of resisting the negative impacts. And if respond is, can you deploy aid in a way that's efficient and in a timely manner, that would be on our recovery side.
Okay.
And so I actually think your question might be a little bit more on the semantics e side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
That makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Monica. Kelly, and then Carla, Joan, Anne Marie, and then last one will be Sophia.
Good job keeping track. Okay, so I'm the director of emergency management for the county. And I don't know if I missed part of your presentation, so I'm not going to ask you to repeat anything that you did, but we haven't been engaged in a conversation about this tool, and we would love to before it rolls out, or as it's like, I have concerns
Okay.
about how it gets communicated and how that relates with mapping we have on our own website for our community. And that also relates back to how does this relate or not relate to the FEMA resilience analysis and planning tool. So there's a FEMA tool that looks at resilience and community resilience, looking at community parameters, but also all hazard. And so just if there's a simple answer, just love to hear the simple answer of how it's different, other than just focus. I know it just focuses on wildfire, but if there's a simple answer of how it's different than that one, I would appreciate understanding that.
Yeah. Two ways that I can think of right now, and we have been talking to the folks who make the FEMA tools,
Okay.
so they're not
Great.
naive of what we've been doing. The first is that FEMA their index is a resilience index, but they do not partition their dimensions of resilience into resistance and recovery,
Correct.
which is like it's not a bad
Okay.
thing, it's just a difference.
Right.
FEMA reports everything at the census tract level because that is where the majority of their data is input from, and ours is reported at 90-meter resolution because we're just handling a lot of things differently. FEMA is mostly focused on social indicators,
Mhm.
and their more structure-y things are like historical structure loss, whereas we mask and only assess things like infrastructure, communities, livelihoods in places where there's a built environment. So this matters because land isn't people, right? And so you have these like really massive, sparsely populated counties, and the way that they sort of show up on maps is like we just mask to where people actually are, to something called the human settlement layer,
Right.
so that you can really see these differences that are more cleanly dividing the social and natural environment. And I guess that would be another major difference is like FEMA is mostly focused on the social side of things, and we have water and air and habitats and species and all these other things that are less considered in that particular context.
And I'll share the link for those not familiar with the FEMA map, just for your guys' awareness. But also for if anyone's looking at that, please know that they only input what are declared federal disasters. So fires like the Alisol fire, which was not federally declared, are not incorporated into their analysis. So I'm not saying I prefer the FEMA one whatsoever. I was just trying to understand the nuance. Appreciated.
Yeah, the other thing I do want to say about FEMA is that the way that they're going to be calculating some of their index moving forward with the BRIC stuff is a little different because of our federal government.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's something
The BRIC
that,
funding has been
yes.
canceled. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Kelly. Carla?
Hi, Kat. That was really interesting and it's wonderful to see this progress. I wanted to ask about, Charlotte asked some of my questions and really wanting to unpack this index more, but I guess I want to know, are some of your 8 different kind of indicators more dependent on certain metrics within them, in the sense that I guess what I'm trying to get at is that you have 100 layers, but they're probably not evenly divided among your 8 different domains, right? And so are some of the domains more dependent on just 1 or 2 layers than the others? And during the process of trying to find out what data are out there, did you identify like data needs that, we need more work in this
Yeah.
area? So from the research perspective, are there things that really stood out to you that we need to do to improve this?
Totally. I feel like this has been an adventure of making a wish list of things that I feel like we should know, but we don't know, which has been incredibly frustrating. Um, Especially like trying to span into Canada. This was our funders' decision, but Canada is very different, which was really frustrating. So yes, I think the number of indicators that go into each domain vary between like 4 or 5 and like 15. So every
Mhm.
individual indicator is weighted, basically contributes differently to the final score. Um,
Yeah.
but in a way that kind of gets buffered by the fact that the each domain is equally weighted, right? So like each
Mhm.
domain is equally weighted in a way that yeah, buffers from like totally overwhelming that information. We also, to get mathy, resilience, we partition into resistance and recovery, but we combine resistance and recovery as an inverse multiplicative, which is to say that you can have a high resilience score if you have high resistance or if you have high recovery. You don't have to have both. So there's
Mhm.
additional buffering that happens downstream. Um, so it's complex in that way. In terms of wish lists of data that I wish we had, but we don't have, Carla, I think I sent you an email like a year ago about grass.
Oh,
Oh man, like we don't have good information on grasses, grass traits, where grass is. That'd be great to know. We don't have really good, finely resolved and temporally resolved maps of invasive species in a way that like that would be really good information to have. Um, so yeah, I have a wish list of data that I really wish that we had, that some of it we're working on, and we've got a couple of parallel papers that go with this main paper where we've created new data layers. Um, but yeah, this has really highlighted some of the issues that we have.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Joan?
Thank you so much. What an extraordinary undertaking. It's hard for me to even get my mind around it. It seems to me that the scores, when you aggregate, kind of converge in the mid 70s. So it's hard to distinguish at that index level, and you almost have to get into the domains. But I'm intrigued by what you said about your historic analysis and looking at return on investment, and how you're going to see variation and then can begin to ask why, and get ideas on what this means in terms of policy. So just wondered if you could talk a little more about that. What's coming?
Yeah, so we have secured some more funding to do a retrospective analysis, and I would estimate that we are 75% of the way through gathering all the data layers and reassembling our index. And I would say that that's the easy half of that research program. The hard half is figuring out exactly what you said, is like, did our indicators perform well in the context of a fire? How do we detect return on investment for different interventions and strategies? And so to do that, we need to identify where and when these different activities happened. And some of it is on the easier side. Like we have pretty good confidence of when and where wildfires happen. We have pretty good confidence on when and where prescribed fires happened. We probably have less confidence on where landscape treatments happened and when. And the California Wildfire Task Force has been putting together a landscape treatment tracker for the last couple of months. And we are working closely with them to figure out how we can align the treatments that they have with the index that we have. I saw in the chat somebody asked if I could link the paper. I'd love to, but it needs to get through peer review first. It's been a long road. I'm sharing early for a scientist.
Great. Thank you. Anne Marie?
Yes, many questions, but I'll focus on two for the sake of time, and hopefully we can connect. Offline, we're also recipients of the Moore Foundation grant funds, and I don't know if they're planning another retreat this year in March, April, but if so, that'd be great to connect there or offline some other time. But at least two that I had was it was interesting to see the map of Santa Barbara County and seeing that it looked like Guadalupe and Santa Maria had the lowest Wildfire Resilience Index score. And I know this index isn't looking at risk as a component, but it's kind of interesting to me that's the area in the county that probably has the least direct impact from wildfire that had the lowest score. I'd be curious how that could potentially affect insurance or community perceptions when their chance to be hit by fire is so incredibly low. Even the fire department there doesn't consider wildfire a risk.
Yeah. So the communication rollout strategy is something we are like actively workshopping with the Moors because we know that it can go poorly. So figuring out how to really get that messaging across that this is not a risk index is something that we need. I'm more than happy to receive advice on too. It's like how to do this in a way that is super, super clear. One of the things that we've been thinking about and talking about is like in the website, we are really focused on our index because that's the product that we created. But I think that there might be contexts in which it's helpful to overlay wildfire risk maps so that you can understand that relationship of like risk is hazard and vulnerability and exposure, right? And like if you're in a place that has very low hazard, maybe you're not that worried about this. And that's okay, right? I'm not entirely sure I've answered your question at this point, but
Yeah,
that's
I
sort of
know it's
what.
complicated. I don't know if it's worth including a layer
Okay.
like that, just be able to help with the communication or what that would look like. I'm sure there's lots of smart people you guys are talking with to try to figure this out.
Yeah,
And my
it's really
second,
challenging.
I can only imagine. And that kind of goes to my second half comment, half question, which I like the idea and concept of this. Remember when Ben Halpern mentioned it a couple years ago and was really had very skeptical then, still skeptical now. I think where that skepticism that lies is just using the term like resilience in there. To me, what you guys are measuring isn't quite resilience. I'm not sure the name for it. I feel like when I heard you talk at the Dargan's last month, something came to my mind as I was talking through it with someone, but it's still not quite resilient just because you guys were forced to look at such a broad scale. You can't really get like that really fine scale data that when working at the county level here, or even with individual fire risk communities, I'm sure there are things data we could get, questions we can get answered to really understand a community's or a county level fire resilience. And California is very data rich compared to most places you're looking at, but even at that broad scale, it's still complicated. So you guys are very restricted in that regard, but it's just considering like the county combine all their dispatch into one center, that is increases our resilience. But I'm not sure that'd be captured in an index like this. And even firewise communities, like just because a community is firewise doesn't mean they're doing the work to become more resilient. And communities that aren't firewise are also doing the work. So that isn't captured just because you're not firewise, you're not trying to become more safe. So it's all those things that it's at such a broad scale can't capture. So I guess getting to my question is if you had the data that really micro scale and it existed broad scale, like what would be the indices that you guys would like to measure for to really look at kind of this like uh resilience then? Because then one thing comes to mind is if people are fully insured, that's a component of the resilience. Obviously, we can't measure that at such a broad scale, but if you could ask like every single person in like Santa Barbara County, what indices would you guys be looking for then?
Yeah. So one of the things to get like very existential, one of the things about this index is like we assume that people share these landscape values, these 8 that we've come up with, which may or may not be true, may or may not be true at the scale that we've chosen. We assume that the 8 domains are weighted equally, which again may or may not be true. In building this index, I have had somebody tell me that they couldn't care if Yosemite burned to the ground. They only care if their house burns, which was interesting it was interesting conversation. But it really got to like the values and the fact that this is a value-driven index. And so we all absolutely accept and embrace the reality that people may not share like even outside of the data inputs, they may not share the values that we have built this index on. So that's part one. We are in the process of building an R package, which maybe is relevant to you all, but basically it's a way of manipulating the data that we have, and you can reconstruct the index with your own values. You can say, I don't actually care about iconic species, for example, and you can drop it from the calculation and rerun things based on what your values are. So we're trying to build out ways to toggle through and make this flexible to end users. So that's part one of it. Part two is like the reality that you point out is like we had to do this for 2 countries, like let alone a whole state, 2 countries. And so California is very data rich. We've been chatting to the folks with the task force, and like they could take our tool and the app that we're developing, not an app, the package that we're developing, and they can swap in data layers that they prefer, right? So like an example is like people really care about the like horned owl, I think it is. There's an owl that the state of California really cares about, but it's not on the IUCN list of threatened species, so it's not in our index. And so they could swap in things that they think, like people can swap in things that they think are more relevant. They can swap in higher quality data in a way to sort of help make this better. It's not a low technical lift. So one thing that's happened with the Ocean Health Index is we've contracted out and done downscaled versions. So if the county of Santa Barbara wanted a downscaled version and wanted to do a series of conversations about like, okay, what are your values? What are your data? Like, let's go around and let's look at everyone's roofs and see what kind of roof you have. There is the capacity to do, or not, sorry, there is the possibility to do that kind of work at a more regional scale that speaks to better data and different regional values.
Helps because one thing staff and I were talking about was creating a report card for fire risk communities, so they can at a more community level see the kind of hopefully increase in becoming more fire safe, fire resilient, because we can get to a good portion of the community to ask questions like, are you fully insured? Do you guys have an annual meeting? How well do you know your neighbors? Things like that. Just curious, what are things should we be considering in that? Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Emery. Okay, the last question, Sophia.
Great, thanks for accommodating me. I'll try to be quick. So I'm looking forward to that paper when it eventually comes out, and happy to connect offline too. I have a question just about how you're thinking about data collection for each of these layers and maybe the uncertainty in those data layers and thinking about that going forward, right? So we know that some, for instance, like the demographic data, right? If you're using the ACS pieces, different geographies have different kind of errors associated with each of those geographies. And I'm sort of wondering, how are you treating that kind of on the whole? You've got so many layers, you've got, different things coming in from different areas, and that sort of uncertainty can affect the visual variation that we see in the end product. And this, again, may not be a question that we should chat about right now, just in the interest of time, but happy to connect at some point if that's of interest.
Yeah, my sense is that that's a longer conversation about how you propagate air through complex systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. All right. Well, thank you, Kat. There is one question that Max put in the chat. Lessons experience related to Ocean Health Index for perspective. Do you have anything to say for that?
Yeah, so the Ocean Health Index calculates ocean health for 220 some odd countries, their exclusive economic zone at a global scale year over year, and provides that score transparently and free. Um, and so to me, I think what the biggest lesson learned here is that there are so many people, like citizens, managers, policymakers, that want information, but there are a lot of paywalls, right? And so that means that communities have differential access to quality information. Um, and that this can help provide a little bit of a bridge there. So everything that we do is free and open access and open source. It's reproducible. It means that, to like lightly throw a place under the bus, like I know when we went up to like we went up to Tahoe, like they spend tens of thousands of dollars to proprietary companies that have black boxes of how they do different calculations to provide advice and input on these different ways to build resilience. And like not every community can afford to do that. And so I think that this is a bit of a democratizing and leveling tool that we can provide and say, like, we're not the be all end all, but like we are a starting point where you can start to unpack your information. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can use it or not use it as you will. We've also found that like a lot of nonprofits want to be able to measure the efficacy of the work that they are doing or have done, but haven't necessarily budgeted for or have a good concept of how to measure impact. And this is a way where it's a tool you can turn to say, like, okay, did we make a difference at this large scale in a way that like is independent of that activity? So I think that to me, those are the lessons from the Ocean Health Index is like, it's very stressful to like create this thing and put it out there. But people do seem to find uses for it. And the fact that it's open and free, I think, lowers the barrier for that use.
Great. Thank you so much, Kat. An excellent amount of work and seemed like in a short period of time creating all those data layer. Holy smokes. So
It's been a lot.
if you have time to look at the chat, there's a few questions there, I think, and then you can stick around, but we're gonna move on. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All
Thank you,
right.
Kat.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go on to agency updates. Nick for Montecito Fire. Anything that going on, Nick?
Yeah, we are getting ready to launch our neighborhood shipping program. That's being funded through the Fire Safe Council and the California Investment Grant Program, starting a little bit earlier this year. So that's kicking off the week of February 9th. Front Country Tree Care is going to be doing that work. We've been doing a fair amount of work since it's been dry on our high roads, doing some brushing. And our home hardening assistance program is up and running, and we've had about 15, I think, people that have received grants for a total about of $80,000, and that's going to continue to progress. I think that's it. Our fire chief, if you don't know, is announced his retirement at the end of April, and so they're in the process of outreaching and hiring his replacement. And the report. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Any questions for Nick? All right. How about County Fire? Fred, you have anything for us? What are you guys up to? Fred, you there? All right, we'll go on. How about Kelly, the OEM? Kelly, what do you have going on? Oh, there's Fred. All right.
Sorry, I was having a technical issue. So, let's see. All right, county fire wise, starting off with a bang, kind of busy in the fire marshal's office with kind of a lot of different plates. But new fire chief, I think I reported that last month.